right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I want to talk to you guys about technological transmutation, Marshall McLuhan and the state of the electric man. And so today's actually going to be a bit of a relaxed stream. We're not going to be doing a huge opening monologue and a thesis. What we're going to be doing today is actually just sitting back and listening to the great Marshall McLuhan express many of his ideas. And so I did this because I think it was maybe a year or maybe over a year ago, I did a stream on the technological prophet, talking about Marshall McLuhan, the great Canadian scholar and founder of the field of communications. And many people were not aware of him. Many of you guys are already aware of Marshall McLuhan. So today, again, is just to introduce him to many people, not so much by me telling you who he is and what he did, but really just together listening to him, and I'll be stopping and pausing and reflecting on many of his ideas. But Marshall McLuhan is important for many reasons. One reason that he saw sort of the 21st century in the 1960s. He's noted for recognizing that the smartphone was going to come, talked about the internet, talked about virtual reality, and his big contribution to the field of communications or media studies is how, well, he wrote a book called The Medium is the Message, meaning the way that we acquire information is not so much about the information that we acquire, but it's how we acquire the information. Are you reading a book or are you watching TV? Are you listening to the radio or are you reading a comic? All these are different mediums, and the medium itself is the message, and it alters what he called our sensory ratios. The senses in which we acquire information are in fact altered by the mediums that we acquire information from. So we're sitting here on all of us are looking at a computer screen or a smartphone right now if you're watching this stream. And so what the point of today's stream is to talk about this sort of technological transmutation of our sensory ratios. Now, again, I've done a couple streams really hinting at and unpacking some of the ideas of McLuhan. Today is much more relaxed. We're just going to be watching multiple videos of his, lectures and stuff like that, and allow him to talk about his ideas for those who aren't familiar. And for those of you who are familiar, you're going to, hearing things that you heard before, you're going to connect new dots. It's more prescient than it ever was. Marshall McLuhan never goes out of style because every time I listen to him, it's like, wow, he's still speaking to today's audience. He's still speaking to today's informational environment is the way in which he talked about it. And so obviously everything's going to be coming from the 60s and 70s. He was the first one to really talk about television and how television was going to make people more illiterate and how this was bringing into what he called the electric man. And so in his book, Medium is the Message, he talked about the sensory ratios in different hot and cold mediums. Hot mediums in which you have to really focus, like reading. You have to intentionally direct your focus to analyze and take in the information. You can't passively read. You have to actively read. We have passively read, and that's when about a page or two goes by, you're like, what the heck did I just read? You got to go back and read it because reading is a hot medium, and there's more information that can be transmitted through the words. Where he talked about there's other cooler mediums like television. Television is a cool medium because it's a passive medium. You sit there and television happens to you. You don't read the television like you read a book. And so he talked about how these hot and cool mediums, again, alter our sensory ratios, and that he saw us moving into the new electric man, which he believed was a return to the oral man, the pre-literate man, and he described this as the global village, that we, as technology was going to move further and the electronification of the planet and of information gathering was going to only be more and more pronounced, that we were going to enter into a sort of global village, that national identities, all sorts of identities, gender identities. He said all this stuff's going to disappear. Homosexuality, gender ambiguity, androgyny, these things were going to become more and more prevalent because what we're doing is we're returning to a pre-literate world. And so this is really interesting for us as Christians. And mind you, Marshall McLuhan was a devout Roman Catholic. That what is the word, the logos, the word of God, and reading the book, the Bible, and how we are then moving away and actually moving into a more illiterate world. And I've covered this just on exams here in the United States, that literacy has historically been on the incline, but for more recent history, especially the 21st century, literacy is getting worse and worse and worse. And I don't know if it's one of the lectures that we're going to be watching today, but in one of them, Marshall McLuhan even said, PhDs, this was in the 60s, like PhDs don't even read and write anymore. And meaning they can't function at the same sort of cognitive level as they once, because they're being affected by the technology itself. So again, we're not going to be doing a huge monologue. I want to get straight into his lectures, and I'll be stopping and we'll be talking and reflecting on many ideas. So that's the game plan for today. I got a handful of videos that we're going to move through. And again, this is a way both to introduce McLuhan, both to, even if you already know who McLuhan is, to reflect on his ideas, to conversate and discuss things with other people. That's the point of today's stream. So before we get started, I'm going to take care of all the housekeeping real quick. The first one being, if you would like to support Church of the Eternal Logos and you like what we're doing here, the best way you can support my work is become a website member. And you can become a website member. There's 3 different tiered memberships. There is the exclusive video library for $5 a month. There is the fitness membership, which we'll be having our first meeting of 2023 tomorrow evening at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is a group of Orthodox Christians, and we talk about our fitness goals, accountability, methodology, things to do, diets, fasting, all that type of stuff. If that's something you're interested, you could join that one, or you can become a premium member for $25 a month, and that includes all of those memberships, those first 2 tiered memberships, along with exclusive meetings in Zoom twice a month just for premium members, and we have a great time. So our premium member cohort is fantastic. I know Charles Zanis, I know Thomas are all a part of it. So if you would like to support, if you would like to become a member, that would be fantastic. You can do so with that link right there. Also, if you have a topic that you'd like to discuss with me one-on-one, be it fitness, be it theology, be it world religions, be it magic, be it mythology, be it goal setting, be it whatever it is, you can also, if you'd like, to sign up for a one-on-one session. And I like to do those on Wednesday, but if you purchase, we can certainly set something up that'll work for both of us. You can do that with that link provided right there. And of course, if you guys would be interested in sponsoring a stream, we got a few sponsored streams on the way here. Obviously, the one that I've been mentioning to you is Alan Moore, and looking into some of his comics, Prometheus, and the occultic elements in some of his comics. But also, we got a new one that I'll be diving into, Atlantis and Lemuria. That'll be coming very soon. Talking about Atlantis and Lemuria, that's a topic I haven't dove into, so I'll be diving into using my research skills to unpack and explore Atlantis and Lemuria. And of course, there's the most recent one where somebody asked me to do a stream on this book right here. This is Oswald Spengler's Man and Technics. This is a contribution to a philosophy of life. And so I'll be reading this book. I haven't. It just came in. But I'll be reading this book and then doing a stream on Oswald Spengler's Man and Technics. Those are the 3 sponsored streams we have in the bullpen, ready to be streamed here in the near future. So those you can expect maybe one of those next week. I also want to mention that Monday evening is going to be, obviously, I won't be able to participate in Subdeacon Mark's course because I have our fitness membership at 7. But on Mondays at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can join Subdeacon Mark as he teaches Byzantine Theology by John Meyendorff. This is every single Monday for free. All you have to do is follow my Telegram, of which there are links in the video description. So follow my Telegram. We post the Zoom links, and anybody and everybody can join. It's totally free, and I join when I can. We are walking through the book Byzantine Theology. Take two. We are walking through the book Byzantine Theology, which I would argue is one of the best overviews of what differentiates Orthodoxy from the Latin West, from Protestantism. How did it develop? What is Byzantine theology? Well, Byzantine theology is the theology that developed during that Eastern Roman Empire. And so it has to do with Gregory Palamas, sort of capstones and really ties together the church fathers, Maximus the Confessor, all these different things that got going. So if you'd like to learn more about Byzantine theology, make sure that you follow my Telegram and you'll get a free link to join his course every single Monday at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So with that being said, guys, now let's get into today's topic at hand. What I wanted to start with today is this one right here. And so I've already kind of laid out to you, the medium is the message. This is one of McLuhan's most famous books, most famous works. This little clip right here, now again, I already did a stream, I think it was over a year ago, almost 2 years ago, called The Technology Prophet, talking about Marshall McLuhan. Now, I have found videos that I did not use in that video. That stream's like over 3 hours long, and I found a ton of Marshall McLuhan stuff to kind of fully unpack his worldview. But this stream, I found new videos, so these are not repeats, but this one particularly, this is Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the Message, 1967. So keep this in mind, and I'll be pausing as we move through it. This video is a sort of an edited video that came out in the 60s. This is from 1967. Now, I also have a video that I want to show you guys called Violence as a Quest for Identity. This is from 1977, so this is a decade later after the first video we watched. And McLuhan talks about this often, that men and civilizations find their identity through violence. And that is true. Anybody who studies history, that makes sense, right? Empires are formed by the boundaries that they have, and men are always pushing those boundaries, and men are defending those boundaries, and so the boundaries themselves define the identity of the people. This is why we've talked about how the dissolution of boundaries is the dissolution of identity itself, which I have a whole stream that I plan on doing next week on the fragmentation of identity and how the elites are wanting to dissolve your identity, be it gender, be it nation, be it whatever it is, your family. And so there's an attack on identity itself. And so violence is the quest for identity. And so as we enter into a world that's become more and more pacified, more and more feminized, we lose more and more of our identity, interestingly enough. So we're going to check that one out. And then if we have enough time, I have a quick one right here on Brave New Worlds, Marshall McLuhan and Tom Wolfe. And then I also have the first section of this one with Marshall McLuhan, Right Hemisphere of Brain and Literacy. This is really interesting. Now, this comes in a discussion with other scholars, but we're not going to watch that. We're just going to see the beginning in which McLuhan talks about the right hemisphere of the brain and literacy. So that's the plan. And so without further ado, let's just dive into this first one. Marshall McLuhan, The Medium is the Message. So here we go. And again, if you would like to support the stream, please super chat using the Streamlabs link, or if you prefer YouTube, however you prefer contributing, that is fine. And then please smash that like as well. I would greatly appreciate that. So here we go.
I come from a 19th century country, Canada, and this gives me a great advantage in looking at the 20th century.
The 20th century is the age of electric technology. It's the most dominant tool of our time. And reevaluate every thought and every institution you formerly took for granted.
I know exactly where the boundaries begin. Mostly they begin in the United States. So any Canadian can see what you cannot see. That is, you live in the 20th century, more or less, and it becomes, therefore, invisible.
The electric age is changing you. It is changing your family. It is changing your neighborhood. It's changing your education. It's changing your job. When are you going to do? It's changing your government. It's changing your relationship to others. These little circuits are making our world go. The electric age is having a profound effect on us. We are in a period of fantastic change that's coming about at fantastic speed. Your life is changing dramatically, and you are numb to it.
Well, obviously his ideas are complex. I mean, he's an intellectual.
A special kind of intellect.
And his ideas are in the realm of intellect. They're complex ideas. But our society is a complex society. There are many people who want things, simplified. Of course, if intellect spoke in simple words, then people like me would be out of work.
Well, the title, Medium is the Massage, is a teaser, a way of getting attention. There's a wonderful sign hanging on a Toronto junkyard which reads, "Help beautify junkyards. Throw something lovely away today." And this is a very effective way of getting people to notice a lot of things. And so the title is intended to draw attention to the fact that a medium is not something neutral. It does something to people. It takes hold of them, it roughs them up, it massages them, it bumps them around, and as it were, chiropractically. And the general roughing up that any society gets from a medium, especially a new medium, is what is intended to be indicated in that title.
The medium of our time, electric technology, everything from the light bulb to the telephone to the computer to jets to nuclear energy, is changing everything. We are in the middle of a tremendous clash between the old and the new.
The medium does things to people, and they're always completely unaware of this. They don't really notice the new medium that is roughing them up. They think of the old medium because the old medium is always the content of the new medium, as movies tend to be the content of TV, and as books used to be the content, novels used to be the content of movies. And so every time a new medium arrives, the old medium is the content, and it is highly observable, highly noticeable. But the real roughing up and massaging is done by the new medium, and it is ignored.
The idea that television, computers, and the rest are just tools that we use for better or worse isn't true. The way you react to them is what's important, not what's in them or on them. How you use your eyes to see, your ears to hear, brings about new forms of human association and action.
The way we refer to this new situation created by the new television massage or treatment of our senses, and it is an evaluation made by the old visual types looking in the rearview mirror as usual of something that is threatening the old values and reversing the old values.
When information is brushed against information, the results are startling and effective.
We are re-entering the old tribal world, but this time we're going to go through the tribal dance and the tribal dream wide awake.
The search for involvement and fill-in takes many forms.
It's like drawing cartoons. You can't fill in all this because none of these things happen without some sort of cause or some sort of reason in the minds of other people. The discotheque, the go-go, as a form, is an area in which anybody who takes time can make interesting discoveries. Many of the things I talk about I find very irritating. That's what leads me to investigate them. You look around for a hair of the dog that bit you. I look into many of the new forms simply because I find them very exasperating and irritating and troublesome to peace of mind and so on. And on the other hand, I've discovered, to my amazement, that if you take some violent and irritating process, say like radio or TV, and start looking at how it works, what it's doing to you, and why it's doing it to you, you can get very enthralled, very excited.
Television has been labeled sterile.
There is nothing sterile about television, except in the eye of the beholder. The FCC type of observation of television, they're totally irrelevant, totally incapable of coming to grips with this form. When you speak of sterility, you speak of the movie programs that are shown on TV. You're not talking about television at all.
Marshall McLuhan is a professor of English at the University of Toronto and director of its Center for Culture and Technology. He's the author of several books and hundreds of articles whose sales increase daily and spreads. Suddenly, everybody, press, industry, corporations, and the new youth, have discovered him. And he has become a storm center of extreme controversy.
My largest objections to his principle is that he's basically, and this is a distilled view of what I've gotten from his work and from his presence, a whimsical sociologist rather than a penetrating philosopher or a deep-thinking psychologist.
The ordinary child of our culture is being educated, massaged by the TV form into a state of participation in all sorts of sensuous operations that the old visual culture carefully refrained from and kept distant from.
The week after the book came out, you suddenly heard professors starting talking about the grain and the medium is the message, and suddenly all these little slogans, were all just being picked up, like that, and it became sort of rather sort of mud.
I want to make a note that for those of you who aren't aware of Marshall McLuhan, during the 1960s, he was something like a cultural phenomenon. Multiple U.S. television shows would have him on, would interview him and ask him to sort of unpack his ideas. And this caused, I would argue, a lot of jealousy among scholars. And that's what this is trying to show, is these important names. That's why it's showing you their names and how they're kind of dismissive of Marshall McLuhan. However, time proved McLuhan right. And when he was talking about children being educated by the television, this is the boomer generation. You see, one of the things about the baby boomers is that they are the first generation to really move out of their sensory ratios were totally altered by the television. Their parents were, as he said, the visual culture. Visual culture, when he talks about it, is literate culture, because literate culture, you have to look at the book, you have to read, and that changes the way you deal with art. And so as we moved into the electronic age, you see abstract art, abstract expressionism to develop, because it changes the way we look at the world. That, as he argues, as we moved into the electronic era, we became oral, auditory, as opposed to visual. And this become, our ears are now the main sense. And when the ears are the main sense, you are the center of your world, because that's how the auditory sense works. Whatever room you're in, wherever place you're at, you're always right in the center because of the sound waves that reverberate around you. Whereas a visual man, it always has a form of perspective. Things all aren't happening all at once. There's a perspective, there's a distance, there's a separation of self. And this has to do with, as we'll talk about, with identity. So as the electronic man's become more electrified, he's going to lose more of himself, and everything is going to become more and more happening. And in fact, he'll talk about, I don't know if it's in this one, but he'll talk about how the loss of privacy, because information is simultaneous in an electronic environment, we lose our privacy because everything is happening at all times, and therefore we're all participating in everybody else's business. Whereas the visual man, the literate man, we're talking early 20th century, 19th century, those people, and you can look at the formality of the way they dressed, the formality of the way they spoke. That is because the sensory ratios in which they took up information was very different than especially the most pronounced was the baby boomers, who grew up with the television. And so they grew up in a totally different informational environment, which totally altered then their understanding of their sensory ratios.
Why should in the TV age scuba diving or skin diving suddenly become popular? I would say right offhand, the reason is very simple. TV watching is scuba diving.
I do believe he is a popularizer. I do believe in 5 years we will look back at this book and perhaps shrug our shoulders. I don't think it's of long or lasting influence.
The movie has become progressively better understood since TV. It has become an art form. It is being given all sorts of special consideration and is even being used as a recruiting center for political talent and other show business.
I think Mr. McLuhan seems to be awake to all of the media of modern life, certainly, and he understands, perhaps either intuitively or with his very broad intelligence, the meanings of the various major art movements, including pop art.
Now that we have an electronic sort of world, we live imaginatively in the old frontier world of, horse opera.
Salinger was the great hero, and strangely enough, for another group, A.A. Milne. So it doesn't have to do with adulthood or maturity necessarily. I believe some of these are fads. However, McLuhan, aside from youngsters who are now involved with Lord of the Rings in the same way, has some interesting things to say. And the fact that Madison Avenue got more involved with him than perhaps academia, and I'm talking about faculty level at academia, I believe is revealing.
The fact is the telephone speeds up all patterns of human interrelationship so that all kinds of decision-making, all kinds of organizational life inside business and in the community are changed completely.
His writing style is extraordinarily up to date. It has a kind of swing to it that mediates between highfalutin scholarship and ad writing. And when you read that, although it doesn't read clearly all the way, somehow the cumulative effect of it is that you understand much better than if you heard some stuffy scholar talking in a classroom.
To me, this is his role. He's talking about goggles, and everybody's got a set of goggles. Everybody thinks his own set was given to him by God and is universal, natural, and supposed to be. And what he's saying, he says, just for a minute, think of the possibility that maybe your set of goggles is a private, idiosyncratic set of goggles. And suppose that the generation before had a different set of goggles, and you got this set of goggles, and you both think you're looking at it the same way, and you're not.
No, the praise is not completely unanimous. Though Life has labeled him the oracle of the electric age, and the Herald Tribune said he may be the most important thinker since Newton, Darwin, Freud, and Einstein, he has also been called the high priest of pop culture, the intellectual celebrity, and even that nut professor in Canada.
People being excited by McLuhan is that he really has a great knack for developing slogans, like the medium is the message and the channel and the information, those sorts of slogans, and they're very appealing. I really have nothing against Marshall McLuhan, except that he got everything from Norbert Wiener, who was a mathematician.
The medium I employ is the probe, not the package. That is, I tend to use phrases, I tend to use observations that tease people, that squeeze them, that push at them, that disturb them, because I'm really exploring situations. I'm not trying to deliver some complete set of observations about anything.
I don't think he makes a decision. I don't think he commits himself, which, depending on your view of where our art is going, would either make him a potentially great artist or not one at all.
I'm an investigator. I explore, and instead of explaining, I explore.
Our time is a time for crossing barriers, for erasing old categories, for looking ahead.
Ordinary people prefer to live in the immediate past, a bonanza style. That is, modern suburbanite livers in USA live not in modern suburbia, they live in bonanza land. One stage back, the Cartwright territory is a much more comfortable territory to live in than modern suburbia. That is, emotionally, it is much more gratifying and secure to live in bonanza land, and it is the old environment. Every time a new environment forms with a new medium, people go back and live in the old one. When the Cartwrights were actually running USA, say back in 1850, 1870, people weren't living on the frontier at all. They didn't live in bonanza land when bonanza land actually existed. They were living back in Jeffersonian democracy.
Are you living in today's world?
In the new electric world, where everybody is involved in everybody, where everybody is involved in complex processes that are going on in the total environment, the old identity cards that used to constitute private identity, the old means of finding out who am I, will not work. People now have to encounter themselves in the inner world, Kierkegaard or existential style, in order to know who they are. The old methods of merely external identity by marks of occupation, national origin, age grouping, and so on, these will not serve any longer as means of distinguishing private identity.
How much do you make? Have you ever thought about suicide? You are fast losing your private identity. Information is being collected about you, and it's being recorded in the corporate memory, making up one big computerized gossip column. It is unforgiving, unforgetful. And so it goes, every minute of every day. You are the mass man, the collective store of all that ever happened. The walls of your rooms are coming down. It's becoming a simple matter to wire and pick out of your homes your private, once solely personal life, and record it. Bugging is the new means for gathering information. Who knows? Maybe you've been bugged for sound. It couldn't happen. What's that buzz?
Privacy was almost unknown, even in Shakespeare's day. It came in after that period, in the 17th, 18th centuries, and it was dependent upon an architecture that sealed off spaces. People didn't live in private spaces in earlier periods, and it was with the coming of the book and the need for private areas in which to read and study and so on, that privacy gradually caught on as a value. I don't think privacy has quite the same meaning in our time that it used to have. I know, for example, a big business in Toronto where all the private offices have been dissolved, all the walls have been pulled out so that the participants in this business can sit together around tables in the middle of the big office space so that they can watch each other's responses to stocks and world events and so on. They want a perpetual dialogue going on among themselves as a response to world events.
The family circle has widened, Mom and Dad. The world pool of information, constantly pouring in on your closely knit family, is influencing them a lot more than you think. The instantaneous world of electric informational media involves all of us, all at once. Ours is a brand new world of all-at-onceness. Time, in a sense, has ceased, and space has vanished. Like primitives, we now live in a global village of our own making, a simultaneous happening.
Global village is not created by the motor car or even by the airplane. It's created by instant electronic information movement. The global village is at once as wide as the planet and as small as a little town where everybody is maliciously engaged and poking his nose into everybody else's business. The global village is a world in which you don't necessarily have harmony. You have extreme concern with everybody else's business. and much involvement in everybody else's life. It's a sort of Ann Landers column writ large. And it doesn't necessarily mean harmony and peace and quiet, but it does mean huge involvement in everybody else's affairs. And so the global village is as big as the planet and as small as the village post office.
We now share too much about each other to be strangers to each other.
For example, in the age of the information explosion, all the walls go out between age groups, ethnic groups, between family groups, national groups, between economies. The walls all go out. People suddenly have to adjust themselves to this new proximity, this new interrelationship. And merely to tell them that this has happened isn't very helpful. What they need to know is, if it is happening, what does it mean to me? For example, in the matter of, say, automation and jobs. Information at electric speeds blows out all the partitions between jobs, involves people in firms, in operations that are total and inclusive, so that big business has discovered that instead of a person occupying a little specialist slot in the business, it's better to work with small teams that can take overall cognizance and consideration of the whole operation of the firm, and come up with all sorts of new solutions for factors that affect the entire operation of the firm, instead of just going ahead doing their little job in the old pattern. Same way with private lives. What had formerly been private life tends to become more and more corporate.
Today, the information level of education in the classroom is far below the level of modern home environment of electronic information.
The reason that the 19th century child could take the curriculum and the schoolroom of his time with some seriousness was that he knew there was a considerable relation between what was going on in the schoolroom and what was going on outside. That is no longer true. We still go on 19th century style with classified subjects, instruction by stenciling on brain pans, and regurgitating in exam form. This is all 19th century factory system schoolwork, but it's no longer supported by the outside environment. The electronic environment makes an information level outside the schoolroom that is far higher than the information level inside the schoolroom. In the 19th century, the knowledge inside the schoolroom was higher than the knowledge outside. Today it is reversed. The child knows that in going to school he is, in a sense, interrupting his education.
Education must...
Isn't that so insightful that he saw this? Again, this is from 1967, that he saw that the wealth of information was outside the classroom, right? And so think about now, this is before the 21st century. Now the 21st century, what is the point of the classroom? And as many people have highlighted, I think the universities, moving further into the 21st century, the universities are going to be in serious, serious trouble because they're not as useful as they once were. And in fact, it's as he says, it's a stifling of one's education. It's not the advancement of one's education, because now with the access of the internet and all this information of all the casuistry happening at once, you can learn a lot more outside the classroom than inside it.
Shift from stenciled instruction to discovery, probing, and exploration. The young today want roles. They want total involvement now, rather than just fragmented, specialized jobs or goals. How can our youth look forward to a specialized job when the computer world of automation may eliminate that job?
The reason that our educational system is in crisis is because we don't know how to stop this flow of data, this one-way flow of data onto the brain pans of the unfortunate and helpless students.
All media or technologies work us over completely. They are so permeating throughout in their personal, political, psychological, moral, ethical, and social consequences that they leave no part of us untouched.
Any new medium changes the image we have of our own bodies. For example, the motor car is a vast extension of our feet, and it turns you into a paraplegic in a powered armchair, as it were. but it changes completely the image we have of our bodies. With television, the image we have of our bodies is profoundly altered by the fact that the image goes inside us, and this has had a profound effect on the motor car. The safety car is partly the response or the effect of television on the motor car. Involvement in the motor car in a new way makes people feel that it's something they ought to be able to control and from which they might expect a certain degree of safety. This is very much a TV effect on motor car. It may destroy the motor car. But the image we have of our own bodies is completely altered by any new medium. Color television is not the old black and white television with color added. It is a new medium. It completely alters the image we have of ourselves. Our body percepts, as the psychologists say. Our body percept is something of which we are always unconscious. Your body percept changes directly with any alteration in temperature, any alteration in sound, any alteration in input through any of the senses affects your body image. Of this you are completely unaware. Only a psychiatrist can really make you aware of the image you have of your own body.
All media are extensions of some human faculty, mental or physical. The wheel is an extension of the foot. The book is an extension of the eye. Clothing is an extension of the skin. Electric circuitry is an extension of the central nervous system. The extension of any one sense displaces the other senses and alters the way we think, the way we see the world and ourselves. When these changes are made, men change. Before the alphabet, our primary sensory organ was the ear.
The great power of the phonetic alphabet, as discovered in antiquity, consisted in creating a means of translating all languages and all human activities into a common set of symbols, which were quite neutral and non-involving. Literate culture, as discovered by the Greeks and practiced by the Romans, created civilization in the sense that it created a high order of civilized culture from which people could detach themselves. That is, literate culture is visual and detached. It creates the civilized man, the detribalized man, the man who is not involved. And the effect of the electric revolution is to create once more an involvement that is total.
We are unaware of the dangers of not understanding the need for involvement.
The dangers are total. The chances of your understanding anything going on in your own time are very small, except through the means or media provided by artists. Artists are people who enjoy living in the present.
Since the time of the Renaissance, we have been contained by a visual monopoly. Art was rigid and kept us out of the frame. Today, art is anything you can get away with.
My own way of testing the sorts of effects that any new form is likely to have on us is to keep a sharp lookout on changing styles in the arts. The artist is always a jump ahead of technology and is engaged really in giving you images of what sort of effects it's likely to have upon you later on. So that the changing style in the arts, like pop art and so on, are pretty good indications of the real meaning of television. Pop art simply tells you the only art form left for you today is your own natural environment. You have now to program it as if it were a work of art and an environment. So to suddenly be confronted with the need to use the human environment itself as art form is one way of drawing attention to the fact that the new environments created by new media require a certain amount of human programming and control for our psychic life. Why should art and culture suddenly become very big business, like big science? The reasons are tied up with the fact that, that we're living in an information age. When you live in an information age, culture becomes big business, education becomes big business, and the cultural explosion or the information explosion becomes itself culture. It knocks down all the walls between culture and business, as between education and business. There's no longer any gap between the campus and the Wall Street or very big business. If anybody can participate in this whole area of exploration and discovery, and so I try to tease people and to urge them to get into these activities of discovery. Children love it. You can quickly get them going because one reason being they sense that here is an area that in which I can become far more expert than my teacher. What about pop art? Why pop? Why not mom? Art used to be mom's province. Suddenly, pop art. It's a pun.
Puns, jokes, humor as a system of communications and as a probe of our environment. It doesn't deal in theory, but in immediate experience. And it's often the best guide to our changing times.
One of the strange features of our time is the joke without the storyline. Simply the gag, like the surgeon, the expensive surgeon who, when his patients couldn't afford surgery, would offer to touch up the x-ray for free. Or the Polish jokes like Alexander Graham Kowalski, the first telephone pole. That was the first Polish joke I ever heard. One of the best. It's possible, or the what's purple and hums? Why, naturally, an electric grape. Well, why does it hum? Doesn't know the words. And these jokes have no storyline. They're just conundrums, and the kids eat them up. They think the old storyline jokes are for strictly square. In the electric age, you don't have a continuity in the old sense. You don't have a strung out continuum. Everything happens at once. Everything goes over everything else, and so everything affecting everything else. There are many examples of this, and it helps to bring to mind that every joke really reveals a grievance. Humor comes out of a world of unhappy and bitter grievances. Hence, many of the jokes in our society, most of the jokes in our society, the good ones, come from ethnic groups, various minorities who have some sort of gripe.
My name was say Manic.
In regards to the ethnic groups, in regards to jokes and minority, we can see also how this is affecting meme culture, right? So we talked about the meme wars and humor and how the memes are these bite-sized bits of units that if you laugh at the meme, you've already bought into the paradigm of the meme itself. And how now what's funny is there's sort of criticism of the liberal agenda, right? Traditional comedy, SNL, most stand-up, it's not funny anymore. Why? Because there's no grievance. In fact, it goes along with the system itself. Now the grievance is, in fact, the people who are ostracized and persecuted by the system. And that's why then we look at where the culture is. Well, it's people like Tim Dillon, a white homosexual man that's, mocking the liberal globo-homo agenda. It's a conundrum itself. It doesn't fit totally nicely, but it's a grievance within the people who are actually being persecuted.
Clothing as a means of communication? Don't you think they're trying to tell you something?
The whole world of teenage dress is a world of icon in one hand, in the sense that they stress all sorts of images with strongly marked bounding lines. But these images, the costumes that they prefer, are the ones that highlight role-playing rather than individual identity. They would rather be involved well, for example, a judge with a wig doesn't represent any private entity whatever. He is a role, a function in the whole society. The surgeon in his white coat, the scientist in the white coat, this is role-playing. And this appeals deeply to the young, the teenager type. The wearing the long hair, the beards and so on, this suggests involvement in depth in role. And it's not a private identity so much as a corporate one. The new teenage craving, and unconscious, they are not quite unaware of why, is to drive toward corporate involvement in role-playing. Role-playing has been a game going on in management centers and so on for years as a way of discovering who am I in this organization. Popular hit parade music is still very close to speech patterns. One of the things about the Beatle music, for example, that is so effective is that they were the first, as far as I know, to put English popular speech, popular lower class British Cockney rhythms and Liverpool rhythms into musical form. The English have never had a music directly related to popular speech before. When you make a music that is related to popular speech, it enables the singer to put on the whole audience, the public, as a mask and wear it as a mask of power. The Beatles are powerful. Any popular music is powerful because it puts on the rhythms and the patterns of the whole audience as a mask.
John Cage, a composer of new music, has stated, "Everything we do is music. Everyone is the best seat. Theater takes place all the time, wherever one is. And art simply persuades one that this is the case. One must give up illusions about ideas of order and expressions of sentiment. Accept that a man is a man, and a sound is a sound. The ear, like the electric age, is a world of simultaneous relationships."
Television is directing our energies inward. Our children today are growing up as a kind of yogi, a Zen Buddhist bunch of inward-directed people looking seriously into themselves, not just idly selecting some exterior goal, but seeking for some completely meaningful identification with some great process. That's why Youth Peace Corps and so on appeals to children. It's not a job. It's a completely involving role. And so the television, I would say, has had this extraordinary effect of driving Western man inward. Western man has triumphed over nature because he's been oriented outward at the visible world. And now with television, he is being oriented inward to the invisible world. And LSD is merely one little side issue in TV effects.
Television establishes the dynamics of our new age. With its always scanning finger, it reintegrates the human senses, thereby making books obsolete. Books are now art objects. Television demands participation and involvement of the whole being. It was the funeral of President Kennedy that mostly proved the power of television to draw everyone into mass participation. The entire nation and world were simultaneously united in a single emotion and involvement.
And mind you, the assassination of Kennedy itself was on television, right? So they were a passive participant in the assassination itself, which totally characterized and mortified an entire generation, the baby boomers. So when we deal with parents and baby boomers, we cannot underplay the important role television has in altering their senses. That's why, well, I don't get it. My boomer parents, they still watch Fox News or news agencies or the official because it's essential to the sensory ratios that they have been programmed since they were children. Well, you know, all my millennial and Gen Z friends, we do research on the internet and we find alternative stories and alternative understandings and we're called conspiracy theorists. Well, again, that's a different relationship to information and how it's processed and how you dive into it and perceive it.
Kennedy came into office as the first TV president with a resulting involvement on the part of all age groups in his whole presidency that was quite unexpected, and so that his assassination created a corresponding violence of response that was quite unexpected on all age groups and in many other parts of the world besides our own. A satellite system of broadcasting permits, for example, an immediate participation in events anywhere in the world, ending all news reports. What we call a news report is a verbalized substitute for participation in that event. With satellite broadcasting, you just go to the place and participate directly in the sufferings or the events of that area, floods or whatnot. Whether this will tend to create a new kind of news, I don't know. For example, at the present time, what we automatically think of as news is just bad news. If it isn't bad news, it isn't news. If it's good news, it's likely to be PR or advertising. And it takes an awful lot of bad news to sell all that good news that we have to carry in our newspapers and magazines.
What type of presidential candidates will best lend themselves to television?
Oh, well, they have to be flexible, casual, Will Rogerish, Jack Parrish. They have to have a kind of informality and casualness that is suited to the medium. The more ramrodish, rigid types will just not go down with the TV viewing public at all. It's sort of turning TV over to the casting bureaus, and politics, having become show business, is increasingly in the hands of the casting agencies.
The railroad radically altered the personal outlooks and patterns of our society. It bred and nurtured the American dream. It gave us darkest suburbia and its lasting symbol, the lawnmower. The circuited city of the future will not be the huge hunk of concentrated real estate created by the railway. It will take on a totally new meaning under conditions of very rapid transit and communication.
Well, the city, created partly by the railway as a railhead, the city has undergone strange transformations with the motor car on one hand and the airplane on the other hand. The tendency of the motor car is to extend the city as a ribbon development right across vast territories, so that between here and Boston is like one city. Between here and Washington is a city. And on the other hand, the airplane sort of leapfrogs over those spaces and wipes out roads, wipes out the big city.
We'll work at home in created space, created by electric media, connected to the corporation or boss, not by railroads or roads, but by television and other media. We'll relay information by closed circuit, two-way TV, and by computer systems. The great massive American rush hour will be over, and to hell with driving.
When many of these kinds of developments begin to occur in many forms at once, at very high speeds, then it becomes easy to perceive the pattern. When things happen relatively slowly, it's like still shots on a film. If you look at them one at a time, it's very slow. you don't see very much change. But project them at a reasonable speed and the pattern of development becomes perfectly evident. We are now living in a world where things change so rapidly that anybody can spot the configuration, the pattern of change. And we're living increasingly in a world of pattern recognition instead of just classified and isolated items. The whole speed up has tended to make everything much more intelligible and understandable than in the past.
The speed of electric communication alone does not allow us to use purely visual material to comprehend the world. They are just too slow to be relevant or effective. We are moving from the habit of data classification, for they refer only to the past, not the present.
Advertising agencies have always been mystified as to why is the storyboard more effective than the final product. And the answer to that is very important. It is that the incomplete form allows the audience more participation than the completed form.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
How many times do you suppose you've heard words to that effect, announcing a commercial? Often, probably, since they're sandwiched between the hours of TV viewing time. The quality and entertainment level of the commercial is getting very high. Fierce competition keeps the advertising agencies constantly reevaluating and recreating their images. To get and hold the viewer's attention, the advertisers reach for new ideas. More and more, because of repeated showings, the new approaches become familiar and accepted.
This is the sound of heart. It will beat 72 times in this minute.
The commercial has preconditioned mass viewing audiences to abrupt film cutting with no storylines. Many of the techniques utilized in modern theatrical films.
Fellini and Bergman and such pull the storyline off the film, and the result is that you become much more profoundly involved in the film process. When you put a storyline on a novel or a film, you're much less involved. All right, the detective story. Edgar Allan Poe discovered, you see, that if you take the storyline off the detective story, the audience has to participate and make the story as it goes. And so, paradoxically, pull the storyline off any situation and you get a much higher level of creative participation on the part of the reader or the audience. And the Fellini 8.5 is a world where the audience has to work very hard, same as abstract art. Same as Picasso. Picasso has a picture of man sitting in chair. There's no man, there's no chair. What Picasso was painting was what it feels like for a man to be sitting in a chair. The audience has to work this out and participate in the experience of sitting in a chair instead of just visually identifying chair and man.
Movies are better than ever, but most movies are still hotter than ever. Hollywood often causes revolutions. As Sukarno has said, the motion picture industry has provided a window on the world, and the colonized nations have looked through that window and have seen the things of which they have been deprived. It is perhaps not generally realized that a refrigerator can be a revolutionary symbol to a people who have no refrigerators. A motor car owned by a worker in one country can be a symbol of revolt to a people deprived of even the necessities of life. Hollywood helped to build up the sense of deprivation of man's birthright, and that sense of deprivation has played a large part in the national revolutions of post-war Asia.
The conflict going on in Vietnam has a corresponding conflict within ourselves. We have a hot war being reported on a cool medium, and it creates a great deal of distaste and reluctance in the population at large, which is very difficult for most people to understand. So cool is evolving, hot is not. My friend is fond of explaining that when he came to this part of New York, the cops told him, if you're ever in trouble, never shout help, shout fire. And he said, if you shout fire, all the windows will go up. You shout help, you'll get nothing. Help is too involving. It demands too much from most people. They're afraid. Fire is not involving. It's a hot medium. You can throw a blanket, throw a bucket, and not be personally involved at all. And so it's an extreme example of this strange conflict between hot and cool. But the movie medium is hot and loves violent events, just as the newspaper is hot and loves violent events. But the TV medium is so involving in the process of whatever's going on that it is cool, and when it handles war and the sufferings of war, it creates an audience involvement which makes war most untakeable. So this Vietnam is our first TV war, and people are finding it not too much to their liking. It may be necessary to ban it altogether from TV from now on.
Media reach out to the very furthermost corners of the world. Hopefully, more and more cool media will be getting there soon, to cool the temperatures raised by the hot media like radio and film. Real total war has become information war. The Cold War is the real war front and should be the only war, surrounding and requiring the involvement of everyone, all the time, everywhere. Whenever the bloody hot wars are waged, they are conducted in the backyards of the world with the weapons of the old technologies. The hot wars are tragedies which needlessly kill, maim, and destroy. The latest technologies have made hot wars meaningless, for there can be no victory. The hydrogen bomb is history's exclamation point.
These technologies we play with create an inevitable chain of consequences. These consequences are inevitable only to people who are not paying attention to what's going on or to what they've done. You know, you press a button and start something. It's not inevitable that you must press the button. If you understand what's going to happen when you press it, it isn't you must press it.
These are difficult times because we are witnessing a cataclysmic clash of two great technologies. The print technology of yesterday and the electric technology of today. We approach the new technology with the psychological conditioning and sensory responses of the old. We are faced with possible failure, the attempt to do a job demanded by the new environment with the tools of the old.
People have always been unaware of new environments because they're afraid of them. From the moment of birth, people sense that the environment, the new environment around them, is hostile. It's a real threat to their whole existence. And so every time an environment changes, we hasten to seek security and comfort in the old environment. I was delighted to come across a passage in Shakespeare a few days ago, a familiar passage, which suddenly revealed the same message. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin, that each, with one consent, pursues newborn gods, though they be made and molded of things past. The new is always made up of the old, or rather what people see in the new is always the old thing, the rearview mirror. And what people see at any time, what their attention is focused upon, is always the rearview mirror, never the present image or the present fact. The future of the future is the present, and this is something that people are terrified of.
The past went that-a-way. When faced with a totally new situation, we tend to attach ourselves to the objects, to the flavor of the most recent past. Suburbia lives imaginatively in bonanza land. We look at the present through a rear-view mirror. We march backwards into the future. There are detracting voices who cry out, "The stars are so big, the earth is so small. Stay as you are." But can we afford to?
And that's the end of our first video. And I love the finishing quote there. There is absolutely, what was it say? There's absolutely, there it goes. There's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's willingness to think. And that is something that we talked about, again, even in the last stream of the myth information, and how these myths and the cultural narratives and the propaganda that we're imbued in a way, allow us to not think. The conclusions are already there for us. We buy the narratives, and therefore we know the next mythologic, the next logical progression based on the myth. And so the only way to wake up is to wake up and think, right? It's to become more rational, which, again, as Christians, it would be to participate in these uncreated energies of God. It's to become more like Christ. Is going to, in a way, shake you awake and become more human, which is the point, because he is the fullness of what a man can be. That is the fusion of God and man. Now, the next ones that I want to show you is, this one's really good, and this is on violence as a quest for identity. And this is a decade after what you just watched. So the video you just watched, The Medium is the Massage, which is a play on The Medium is the Message, was in 1967. What we're getting ready to watch now is an interview from 1977. And I wanted to point out for some people in the chat that, later, by the time of the 1980s, Marshall McLuhan was totally ostracized by the academic community. I saw somebody wanted to speculate if he was in on the hoax. Maybe he was a CIA agent, and I get that, especially given the state of the world that we live in now. But I think one of the things that needs to be mentioned is that for Marshall McLuhan, he only gained a sort of brief period of fame, and this was in the 1960s. By the time of this interview, his fame was already sort of waning, and many academics kind of considered him incomprehensible, and that he was sort of over-exaggerating on the effects of technology. Again, mind you, in the 60s, the early 60s, in the last video that I made about him, the technology prophet, Marshall McLuhan theorized about the internet, about the smartphone, about virtual reality, and where all this stuff was going to go, and how we're going to live in our own electrified imaginations. And that is the metaverse itself. And so he was incredibly insightful, but many in the academic community didn't like what he had to say, and they definitely didn't like that in the 60s he became a sort of pop cultural phenomenon. And he was very popular amongst the sort of psychedelic and the counterculture, though he was not in favor of it necessarily. So Marshall McLuhan talked about it. He never took psychedelics. He was never interested in drugs. He was a reader, and he was a Joyce scholar. So that was one of the really interesting things about Marshall McLuhan, is that there was no such thing as the communications field, even though he sort of founded it and became an expert on media. He was a James Joyce scholar, and his discussions on Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses is incredible. And anybody who's sort of tried to dive into Finnegan's Wake knows that there is a world of information. There's a lot going on there. It's, again, kind of hard to decipher, and in a way, that's the way McLuhan himself was for people. And so by the time of the 80s, and he sort of lost favor. He wasn't as popular, and so I don't think he was part of the system per se, because and also this wasn't sort of some rapid phenomenon. This was his entire life, his entire career was dedicated to looking at writing and communications and the role of English, and so he has a lot of really insightful things. But I don't think that he was a CIA agent or anything of that sort. I think he was just somebody who saw in a way that he perceived, especially the role of technology and how it was altering people. And mind you, he was already an older adult. These videos in the 1960s, he's already in his 50s. So he's already sort of lived a life and had one foot in two generations per se. And so I think he had great perspective. And as he said, he was Canadian. And so at that time, Canada was behind the United States in regards to the technological environment it found itself. That's why you'll hear him say, and he did at the beginning of the video we just watched, that he was from Canada. And so he was in the 19th century. Canada in the early of the 20th century and even the mid-20th century. He said it's a 19th century. The sensory ratios are still 19th century, but in America, it's the 20th century. And that's why Americans cannot see the informational environment that they live in. Now, I want to move into this next one right here. This is Violence as a Quest for Identity. And again, I think this is really interesting stuff as we look at the violence that's certainly geared towards us, but at the same time creating a sort of pacified, feminized culture where there's this sort of lack of violence, right? And so there's a lack of the substantiation of identity itself. Men go to war for the identity not only of themselves, honor, but for the identity of the nations that they fight for the ideas that they fight for. This is the sense of identity. In a way, this is the most important thing. But in the electronic environment, we begin to lose our identity because everything's happening at once. We lose our private identity. It becomes a corporate identity. Our identity is tied to corporate understandings, the public sphere of things. And so what exactly is your identity? Well, I wear this and that, and I do this and that, and it's less about, again, your family's name, these important things, these distinctions of your religion and your values and where you come from, your place, your people. These things are being taken away from us so that we have no identity in the traditional sense.
Laugh and even worry. From the earliest days of television. His arena, the world. Historical period, from the beginning of time. Subject matter, you and I. My guest, Dr. Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan, way back in the early 50s, you predicted that the world was becoming a global village. We'd have global consciousness. And I'm wondering, now, do you think it's happening?
Well, you've heard of Julian Jaynes, the bicameral mind, and the split up of same, and the rise of consciousness.
So your prediction is correct. We're into it?
No. I think it's now we're playing backwards. We're going back into the bicameral mind, which is tribal, collective, without any individual consciousness.
But it seems, Dr. McLuhan, that this tribal world is not friendly.
Oh, no. Tribal people, one of their main kinds of sport is sort of butchering each other. It's a full-time sport in tribal societies.
But I had some ideas. We got global and tribal. We were going to become
the closer you get together, the more you like each other.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of that in any situation that we've ever heard of. That when people get close together, they get more and more savagely impatient with each other.
Well, why is that? Because of the nature of man, or
his tolerance is tested in those narrow circumstances very much. Village people aren't that much in love with each other. And the global village is a place of very arduous interfaces and very abrasive situations.
Do you see any pattern of this, and for example, the desires of Quebec to separate?
I should think that they are feeling very abrasive about the English community and about the way the American South felt about the Yankee North 100 years ago.
But is it a need for space?
No, it's a need for a less abrasive encounter and a little more space between the wheel and the axle. when the wheel and the axle get too close together, they lose that playfulness. There's no play and left. And so they have to have a bit of oil, a bit of distancing from each other, and so on.
And is this distancing, is this going to be a pattern right around the world?
Apparently, separatisms are very frequent all over the globe at the present time. Every country in the world is loaded with regionalistic, nationalistic little groups. Even Belgium has a big separatist movement.
But in Quebec, for example, they define it as the quest for identity.
Yes, all forms of violence are a quest for identity. When you live out on the frontier, you have no identity. You're a nobody. Therefore, you get very tough. You have to prove that you are somebody. And so you become very violent. And so identity is always accompanied by violence. This it seems paradoxical to you, that ordinary people find the need for violence as they lose their identities. So it's only the threat to people's identity that makes them in violence. Terrorists, hijackers, these are people minus identity. They are determined to make it somehow, to get coverage, to get noticed.
And all this is somehow an effect of the electronic age?
Oh, no. But people in all times have been this way. Mm-hmm. But in our time, when things happen very quickly, there's very little time to adjust to new situations at the speed of light. There's very little time to get accustomed to anything.
Would then the quest for identity of the French Canadians and the kind of inherent violence that you speak of, that's concomitant with that, it would have not come so soon without
electric technology? Yes, right? That's true. Things like radio can push people up into a new kind of awareness, which makes it very difficult for them to relate to other people. Ireland has shown many responses to this situation in its relations with North and South of Ireland and its relations with England. I mention them because everybody tends to know a bit about that.
Right.
And has been irreconcilable until now anyway. The English representing the highly literate society and the Irish representing a more oral and a much more communal, tribal group. And where the tribal feelings are strong, radio sends them up the wall. So radio has sent tribal societies around the globe up the wall with intensity of feeling. One of the big violence makers of our century has been radio. Hitler was entirely a radio man and a tribal man.
And what does television do then to that tribal man?
Well, I don't think Hitler would have lasted long on TV. Like Senator Joe McCarthy, he would have looked foolish. He was a very hot character. And like Nixon, made a very bad image on television. He was far too hot a character. Much better on radio or on the movies. Not bad on the movies, which will take quite hot characters. But Nixon was hopeless on TV.
The investigations now of the CIA and the FBI and even our own, God forbid, RCMP, has this anything to do with the electronic age?
Well, yes, because we now have the means to keep everybody under surveillance. No matter what part of the world they're in, we can put them under surveillance. It has become one of the main occupations of mankind, just watching other people and keeping a record of their goings-on. This is the way most businesses are run. Every business has a huge espionage sector. And this is called public relations, and it's called audience research. And this is around the clock. And this has become the main business of mankind, just watching the other guy.
And invading privacy.
Invading privacy, in fact, just ignoring it. Everybody has become porous. They got the light and the messages go right through us. By the way, at this moment,
right,
we are on the air, and on the air we do not have any physical body. When you're on the telephone or on radio or on TV, you don't have a physical body. You're just an image on the air. When you don't have a physical body, you're a discarnate being. You have a very different relation to the world around you. And this, I think, has been one of the big effects of the electric age. It has deprived people really of their private identity.
So that's what this is doing to me?
Yes. Everybody tends to merge his identity with other people at the speed of light. It's called being mass man. It began quite a long time ago.
God save us. New technology, you say, is a revolutionizing agent.
Yes, it creates new situations to which people have very little time to adjust. They become alienated from themselves very quickly, and then they seek all sorts of bizarre outlets to establish some sort of identity by put-ons. Show business has become one way of establishing identity by just put-ons. And without the put-on, you're a nobody. And so people are learning show business as an ordinary daily way of survival. It's called role-playing. Role-playing has become the normal mode of survival in the business world. Jobs have disappeared, as it were, but role-playing has come in on a huge scale. And it's much more flexible than job holding. And jobs are rather static, repetitive things, whereas role-playing is very flexible. You can play many roles, but you can only have one job at a time.
Now, we're reached a point now where everybody 24 years and under is the TV generation, right?
Yes.
Do you feel these young people out there under 24 have been totally tribalized?
They have lost their sense of direction. They do not have goals. They don't have objectives. And that is putting it mildly.
You think that's new?
I think that is typical of the 24 years and under. And yes, I think that's new.
You say, too, that between today's child, who's been raised electronically, and who must still live in a literate world, because we are still in a literate world, that there's a 2,400-year gap between that boy or girl and his parents.
His parents, who grew up in a literate society. Well, the alphabet, the phonetic alphabet, the beginnings of Western literacy came in about 500 BC. And since then, between then and now, is approximately 2,500 years. And we are the first post-literate generation, as it were. That is we have bypassed the literate world of hardware and the lineal left hemisphere technology. We have bypassed it by moving once more again into the altogether world, the holistic world of the right hemisphere people, who are the third world people. So what is happening to our own children is we're watching them become third world.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that they feel much more groupy and trendy than they do private or goal-oriented.
I see.
And so the disc jockeys help this along in a huge way.
Is that not so incredibly prescient that he talked about how the younger people are becoming third world in the sense that they are more groupy, they're more communal, they find their identity by the groups they belong to, as opposed to the private individual, goal-oriented, doing things in their private time, less concerned about corporate identity or mass public identity. And so, again, you can think about social media and how it's only exacerbated this, and that the NPC is the final phenomenon of this, because the NPC is that which is just fully identified with the group phenomenon. It is the official narrative. It is this, the CNN person or even the Fox News person. It doesn't matter, right? It's all a corporate identity. And it leads people to become less and less individual, less and less human, less and less made in the image of God, as we talked about, more and more in that tribal setting, that pre-literate person.
There's all the nostalgia. By the way, one of the big marks of the loss of identity is nostalgia. And so revivals on all hands in every phase of life today. Revivals of clothing, of dances, of music, of shows, of everything. We live by the revival. It tells us who we are or were.
Now, these children that are more groupy and less private, are they also more passionate or more violent?
I think that the sheer dislocation of their lives has put them through a very violent course indeed. They have been ripped off.
But they're kind of rudderless.
They don't have goals.
Don't have goals.
Because at the speed of light, what is a goal? You're already there. You name it, and you're there.
The violence of the media, you say, itself.
And that lack of goal-orientedness is going to be tied to the feminization of society and the lack of, again, we've talked about, the Andrew Tate phenomenon and the manosphere. And what is one of the main messages is that a man has to make himself. A man must be goal-oriented to become a man, because there is a journey from adolescence to adulthood as a man, and that being a man is always tied to the accomplishment of goals. And so as less and less people identify with the accomplishment of goals and orienting themselves towards goals that they set, they are naturally going to become more and more feminized, as we already see.
Invading those not prepared for it. It's not the content that's primary, it's this invasion of privacy that people are not prepared for that is destructive.
Recently had this trial of the young man who appealed to Kojak as his alibi for murder. This is a pathetic thing, because nobody ever mistook fictional entertainment violence for reality. It's impossible. Only people who are leading merely a drugged fantasy life could do that. And there is the strange factor that television is quite a potent drug. It is addictive, it is an inner trip, and it is a tranquilizer. And recently the Detroit Free Press offered $500 for anybody who would stop watching television for a few days. And they didn't get many takers. But those who did take up the thing dropped out very quickly. They couldn't bear it.
Do you feel that the fact that you and I have enjoyed the rewards of literacy, that we are more protected against television than...
Yes, I think you get a certain immunity. Just as you get a certain immunity from booze by literacy. The literate man can carry his liquor, the tribal man cannot. That's why in the Muslim world or in the native world, you cannot, booze is impossible. It's the demon rum. However, literacy also, though, makes us very accessible to ideas and propaganda. The literate man is the natural sucker for propaganda. You cannot propagandize a native. You can sell him rum and trinkets, but you cannot sell him ideas. Therefore, propaganda is our Achilles heel. It's our weak point. We will buy anything if it's got a good hard sell tied to it. And so propaganda is the great big soft spot in the makeup of the literate man.
I see. Electronic people, you say, lose their religion very easily.
Well, their attention span is very weak, as you know. We have invented the one-liner in place of the joke, because people can't wait around to hear you tell a joke. It takes too long. As for critics, said Sam Goldwyn, don't even ignore them. That's a one-liner. and that's all we have time for. There was a wonderful one-liner in the Morning Smile the other day. The teacher asked, somebody defined for me nothing. And a child put his hand up at once and said, teacher, when you peel a balloon, what you have left is nothing. That's a one-liner. It's all we have time for. Attention span gets very weak at the speed of light. And that goes along with a very weak identity.
And religion, which involves ideas, requires a little more time.
Well, religion is a form of indoctrination which requires a considerable amount of literacy.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot get religion into people minus literacy. And as literacy weakens, people lose their religious affiliations.
You've written to, or been quoted as saying, something to do with criminals in jail who have watched endless hours of television. Was that a put-on?
No, that's a little mixed up. What I was referring to was a recent study made in Colorado of the boys behind bars. And the discovery was that every one of them is a dyslexic.
This is behind prison bars?
Yes, in penitentiaries in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
100% dyslexic. That is, people with learning disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens in our world. There have been studies here in Toronto and in Canada of the same phenomenon. And the strange thing is that 9 out of 10 dyslexic or 9 out of 10 learning disability people are boys. Only 1 in 10 is a girl.
But what's the relationship with television or watching television?
Well, TV has a strange effect on the eye muscles. It tends to paralyze or to hypnotize the motor muscles of the eyes, so that the much television viewing person tends to have a very poor ability to move his eyes on the print or across the printed word or on the printed page. And he needs exercises to correct this, and the exercises need to be taken quite early, while he's in his early years, because otherwise they harden. But the ideal exercise for this purpose is the trampoline, for loosening up the eye muscles. But now, the reason that boys are so prone to this problem, and girls are not, is that the exercises that boys take, hockey and baseball and football, these exercises are very crude and muscularly and do not help the eye muscles in the reading activity. Whereas skipping and sewing and cosmetics and so on give the girls a much more delicate muscular coordination than boys. And they have less learning disability.
I see. What now, briefly, is this thing called media ecology?
It means arranging various media to help each other so they won't cancel each other out, to buttress one medium with another. You might say, for example, that radio is a bigger help to literacy than television.
Mm-hmm.
But television might be a very wonderful aid to teaching languages. And so you can do some things on some media that you cannot do on others. And therefore, if you watch the whole field, you can prevent this waste that comes by one canceling the other out. We have paid no attention to the effects that, for example, as we've just been talking about the effects of television on the printed page. Movies don't have this effect. They don't slow down the eye muscles. But we have never studied these phenomena.
But do you think that perhaps at the end of your studies of media ecology, you're going to advise a cut down on watching television, $500 for anyone who'll give it up for a day?
Europeans have cut back on that almost down to nothing long ago, because they realized that it threatened literate values very much. An hour a week is what about the French child gets for television.
Is that right? Dr. McLuhan, you have admitted in the past that you hate to see the upheaval that our world is in. True?
I wouldn't say hate to see it, but it is a very confusing kind of world in which, as I say, you have no time to get adjusted to anything or acquainted with anybody. You know, we live in a world where you meet many, many people per day for the once and only time in your life or their lives.
But I'm thinking more about the fact that born in Winnipeg and mastered in English, and English has largely studied at Cambridge for graduate studies, how English was largely your world. And literature, yes. It's been under attack by these new electronic media, especially television.
Oh, yeah.
This been hard on you?
I don't think so, because there is always the challenge of meeting the opposition head on.
But you wouldn't like to see the literate world disintegrate?
By no means. My values are strongly centered in literacy, which I teach day and night, as it were.
And do you think it will survive?
And this is one of the reasons why, again, McLuhan, he never wanted to, especially in the 60s, it's very rare for him to give a value judgment on his work or technology or TV or radio. But he became more and more of a devout Catholic, and he saw literacy as, as he said, tied to his religiosity, and especially as Christians, the idea of the Logos, the Word of God, and that we read Scripture, we commune with God through the prophetic scriptures of the Bible. And so as we moved more and more into an illiterate world, we moved in more and more into a world before Christ's incarnation, before, again, the development of our own cognitive faculties. And so in here, again, this is a decade after the video we just watched, you can see him begin hedge. I didn't want to say hate, but certainly his value structure, being a Christian, is certainly rooted in the world of literacy and the visual man as opposed to the auditory man.
I imagine so. I think so.
It's said, too, that you felt hostile to modern life. that you loathed machinery and
well,
you hated big cities?
Are they're talking about maybe a period when I wrote The Mechanical Bride?
Probably.
It's a little while ago, all right. I haven't had much time to to indulge those feelings. I've been too busy to develop those hostilities. And I've had a wonderful luck in meeting fascinating people and having wonderful students year in and year out. And so the amount of satisfaction is huge. And it would be a very selfish thing to blame anybody for anything else.
You've also said that you've really never been lonely for a moment in your life.
That's true. I've never had that experience.
You describe your conversion to Roman Catholicism in 1938 as a long pilgrimage and a solitary one, done entirely by reading.
That's, I think, true. Except, again, that I had luck. I met people, too.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mainly a literary activity.
A book by Gilbert Keith Chesterton, What's Wrong with the World?
Yes, handed to me on a Winnipeg street by Tom Easterbrook. He said to me, I hated this book. I think you'll like it.
I've often wondered, I read some Chesterton myself in my younger days. And I've often wondered if you'd be satisfied with your contribution on a much more global scale than Chesterton's, but being something similar to his. He was always taking the accepted and turning it upside down and inside out.
Having a good look at it. From many sides. He was Cubist, you see. A paradox is a form of Cubism in which you look at the same situation simultaneously from different directions. And
so there are some parallels there.
Oh, well, sure. The habit of discontinuous and multi-leveled perception. But it goes partly also with my interest in Joyce Pound Elliott, because they are also multifaceted people and very right hemisphere people. But
and Harold Innis.
Harold Innis, I was very lucky to encounter him. It was through The Mechanical Bride that I met him, and when I heard that he had put it on his reading list, I was fascinated to find out what sort of an academic would put a book like The Mechanical Bride on a reading list. So that's how I went around and met him, and we became acquainted for the few years that remained of his life. He only had about 3 years to live at that time. But Innis, I think, is the only man since the beginnings of literacy 2,400 years ago who ever studied the effects of technology. And I think that is an amazing thing in view of the numbers of great minds that had this opportunity. He is the only human being that ever studied the effects of literacy on the people who were literate, and or the effects of anything on anybody. Mm-hmm. Now, this, as I say, is a unique thing in Innis's case. Aristotle and Plato never studied the effects of anything on anybody.
Would you list The Mechanical Bride and The Gutenberg Galaxy and Understanding Media as the three monuments of yours, as far as books are concerned?
I have a new book called The Laws of the Media, which I hope will be much more attractive. But I'm working on new things all the time.
And still looking for pattern recognition?
It's one of the big excitements of life. It's a sort of detective activity, you know. I do a lot of sleuthing.
On being a Canadian, I think Northrop Frye says that one of the things Canada gives you is a chance to be an observer.
Yes, because you're not too deeply involved in other people's problems. And our own problems are relatively small compared to other people's problems.
And a certain freedom, then?
Yeah, it does. And so you can be an Ann Landers to the world.
What about the multicultural mosaic?
That is an amazing ploy to preserve the cultural identity of Quebec and other minorities.
Why do you call it a ploy, though?
It's a sort of an official ending of Melting Pot. The Quebecois are terrified of being merged in the American culture. I think it's as simple as that. And I think they're right. They're absolutely vulnerable. We're all vulnerable to the Americans. And they're very attractive and wonderful people, and I think we could easily become merged in their lives, as we intend to be anyway.
Well, does that mean that in order to lessen their fears, we attempt to paralyze different immigrant groups coming in at the state of their arrival?
And keep their cultures intact and separate. That is what the meaning of the multicultural mosaic. The mosaic is static. It isn't in a state of constant inanimation or interplay. No, it's static. And that's exactly the way the French want to remain. They want to remain just the way they are. And so it's not that easy. So this is an amazing, as I say, ploy developed to make this possible. I don't know if it will work, but I certainly don't wish them ill on this maneuver. It is a kind of media ecology, you see. It's a way of using our available resources in the communication to keep people apart and to keep them intact without merging. So I think it's a drastic move. I never heard of it occurring in any other country, did you? I never heard of a multicultural mosaic as an idea for immigration. It's an amazing strategy of survival. Survival, however, is a legitimate goal in life, especially in a fast-changing world.
And you felt this yourself?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I have an essay coming out in a Harvard book on Canada called the Canada, the Borderline Case. It's in a book called The Canadian Imagination. And the theme has to do with the strange effects of being on so many borderlines in Canada. We have so many cultural borderlines in every direction that it is very confusing to the idea of private identity or even group identity. But it is a very, very enriching too, because people on frontiers have a very rich life of interplay with other people, other cultures.
Right. I know you don't like to make predictions.
I make them all the time, but I make absolutely sure they've already happened.
You don't like being called a prophet, but of course, I think in the biblical sense, there was an understanding of a prophet of someone who's not talking about the future, but is telling you what is happening now.
Yes,
right?
the present.
Would you like to tell us whether the country is going to stay together or not? And thereby be telling us what's happening to us now?
Well, that is I don't know if I'd call that a prophecy or not. There is a sense in which the separatism occurred long ago. But but there is a hardware sense in which it is still intact. The country is still intact in a hardware sense, a legal sense. It is the hardware, I think, that is under danger under electric conditions. The hardware world tends to move into software form at the speed of light.
You're losing me again, Dr. McLuhan. So in 15 seconds, I've got one question for you. How much television do you watch?
Whenever I get a chance. Not too often. I missed Rigoletto last night. I was very disappointed.
But you don't watch it that often?
No, I don't have that many opportunities.
I see. Thank you, Marshall McLuhan. I hope you'll come back again. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
All right. And then I had two more videos. I guess we can dive into them real quick. I really just wanted to share, I wanted to get into this right hemisphere one, but we'll watch this one real quick. It's only 2 minutes. And then we'll watch the other one's only 10 minutes. And then that's going to conclude our stream. And I'm going to dive into the super chats. And I want to give a special thank you to all the super chatters. And we're going to get to all those in just a few minutes. So about 15 more minutes and then we'll be done. So let's check out this 2-minute video here.
Back garden. Never thought it would happen. It's grand being able to just sit down and talk about some of the things that we're interested in. I was interested, you see, in the fact that you were a Southerner, Tom, and that this relation to an oral tradition is a great advantage to a literary man. In the 20th century, it's very remarkable that all the best writing has come out of Ireland or the American South because of this close relation that the English language has to the spoken word in those areas. And this, too, seems to have something to do with the existence of jazz and rock as art forms, that without an oral tradition of corporate public address,
this kind of music would not occur.
I'm sure a lot of it also has to do with preaching.
Well, there again is a public address system.
Because I really can't think of any part of the country where preaching among both black and white preachers has had such prominence, and where people get so fulsome in their expression, whether it's the very stilted kind of speech that the Southern Episcopalian minister uses with the expressions, forgive us our trespasses, and these very intentional, it's kind of an English mannerism.
Those hesitations and those intervals are actually very involving. It makes the audience just hang on the next phrase. It's like a stutterer who keeps you just on the ropes waiting for him to form another word.
This whole idea of an oral tradition certainly did come back with the Beat Generation. And you got, in fact, I think it was the main contribution people like Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso and Ferlinghetti made was to just to break up the academic portrait which had become so strong after the Second World War.
I enjoyed that paper enormously, and I wanted to tie together, while we have the wonderful opportunity of Professor Havelock's presence, some other things that related him and Harold Innis. And the one way of getting to it, of course, concerns the common interest which Professor Havelock and Innis shared in the impact of the printed word and the phonetic alphabet on Western civilization. And I'm going to make a few comments here. Professor Cornford has an essay which Innis cites in his Bias of Communication, The Invention of Space. And the invention of space, to anticipate a bit, concerns the separation of the visual faculty from the matrix of the human sensorium, the moment when the meaningless abstraction, the consonant, was invented. What Cornford called space in his essay, The Invention of Space, a 1935 essay, what he called space was visual space. The Greeks, long before and long after the invention of the alphabet, lived typically in multi-sensuous acoustic space. Visual space was for them as great a novelty as Einsteinian space-time is for us. Typically, we still live in the Euclidean or visual space, that which the newly literate Greeks invented. A space that is continuous, connected, homogeneous, and static. Visual space is an artifact which exists only in countries that have phonetic literacy. In our own world, visual space is being phased out by the new environment of instantaneous, simultaneous electric information, which is acoustic in structure. That is why I have these two hemispheres here with us today. The world of visual space is in the left hemisphere, the sequential, continuous, connected one. The world of acoustic, primitive, third world space is in the right hemisphere. It's a world of the simultaneous, the holistic, and the world of gestalt and figure ground and pattern recognition. Innis, to anticipate some of the thoughts I'm going to present, Innis began solidly in the left hemisphere, and he moved steadily to the right hemisphere. his later phases are emphatically and strongly acoustic, pattern recognition, intuitive, and simultaneous. These are the reasons for his incomprehensibility to left hemisphere people who found him quite easy in his early phases, say the history of the fur trade or the history of the cod fisheries or the CPR railway. In those phases of the hardware stage of his career, Innes was a solid left hemisphere academic and a respectable man. He became, of course, the exact opposite. Now, this, anyway, to go on for a wee bit further with this matter that Professor Havelock has magnificently opened up for us in his work. Professor Havelock is the first to have analyzed the processes of abstraction by which phonetic letters make the magical transformation of the mind of the primitive man from an acoustic to a visual form. In his own words, he says, script was reduced to a gimmick. It had no intrinsic value in itself as a script, and in this marked it off from all previous systems of scripting. It was characteristic of the alphabet that the names of the Greek letters borrowed from the Phoenicians for the first time became meaningless. Alpha, beta, gamma constitutes simply a nursery chant designed to imprint the mechanical sounds of the letters by using what is now called the acrophonic principle. The basis of this abstraction in the phoneme, the irreducible meaningless bit of sound which is translated by a meaningless sign, the phoneme is the smallest sound unit of speech, and it has no relation to concepts or semantic meanings. It is then a thing perceived on special fragmentary terms, a percept minus a concept. Whereas the syllabaries preserved a relation between percept and concept, e.g. pa, father, pa, P-A-W, with the phoneme, the two are split apart. This involved a split of inner imaginative and outer or verbal experience. The consonant does not exist in nature, only in thought. There is the further sundering of both the phoneme and the sign by virtue of their being made meaningless. But much more than the writer, it is the reader who assumes these dissociations as the basis of replaying and recognizing. And quoting further from Professor Havelock, when therefore it came to transcribing a given oral statement, the signs involved, through the abstract values attached to them, produced a relatively clear, unambiguous, economical register of the exact sounds of what had been said. The reader, therefore, and it is in the act of reading rather than writing that the secret of the alphabet subsists, the reader of any transcription who had previously memorized the proper values could acquire automatic and rapid recognition of the Greek word for the act of reading, or the Greek word for the act of reading, of what was being said. Those are just scraps that I've brought from, mostly from the work of Professor Havelock, especially his recent work on the origins of Western literacy, which was published at OISE, and of copies of which are outside in the hall for your use if you wish them. This huge event in Greek culture, by which for the first time in human history, as far as I know, people who are living entirely by ear became visually oriented and Euclidean in their awareness of space as a continuum. The Euclidean awareness of space as a continuum, infinitely extendable, infinitely divisible. This awareness is a human artifact not a natural awareness such as you get from touch and taste and hearing. This visual awareness of space as a continuum was a product, a magical transformation of the phonetic alphabet acting upon the human sensorium. Now, this same magic has been exerted wherever the phonetic alphabet has been introduced, and with the same results. You develop a continuous, connected, rational activity on the part of people who are otherwise completely intuitive and acoustic. Now, in other words, you get a left hemisphere development in those parts of the world where you have phonetic literacy, and you have ordinarily and otherwise only a left hemisphere, or rather only right hemisphere development, which is simultaneous and acoustic. The peculiarity of visual space is that it is lineal, and the peculiarity of simultaneous, instantaneous information is that it creates a sphere. We hear from 360 degrees, we do not see that way. The visual faculty, on the other hand, is the only faculty that is continuous and connected. There is no such characteristics applying to any of the other senses. The alphabet, which Professor Havelock has superbly studied, it was the means by which the left hemisphere came into action for the first time in human history. It is now being phased out by electronic technology. The electronic world is simultaneous, instantaneous, spherical, and third world, intuitive and right hemisphere. The right hemisphere seems to be the normal and naturally dominant hemisphere of non-literate man. Only temporarily was it phased out by the rise of the alphabet technology. Now, Innes was a very left hemisphere man in his early academic period. He was a conventional, although brilliant, performer. But I think one can detect, even in his early work, his passionate concern with patterns. He was a man who was always looking for structures. His interest in the frontier was always a figure ground interest, not just frontier, but the way in which the frontier created a sort of cyclonic interface of two worlds, one rubbing against another. The frontier is not, by definition, is a figure ground world. It is a figure that has a ground that is more civilized or more developed somewhere else. A frontier can exist inside consciousness at any point. You can have frontiers of speech. Today, the separatist movement in many parts of the world involves separatist linguistic movements in India. And separatism is a frontier phenomenon of cyclonic transformation. The problems of living on a border of the United States present Canadians with this frontier problem of transformation, of figure ground interface and abrasiveness. We have here today, we have the electronic equipment which is translating us into software instantaneously and enables us to be played back as software instantaneously. I would point out, for example, that when you're on the telephone or on the air, you do not have a physical body. All you have is an abstract image. When you do not have a physical body, as you do not on the air or on the phone, you are not the same person that you are when you have a physical body. This is a figure ground relationship which Innes never got around to studying, but it's typical of the sort of thing he loved to study. When you do not have a physical body, you do not have a private identity. And you have no relation to natural law. This just is an immediate consequence of being on the phone or on the air. When you have no relation to natural law, or that is no physical being, what happens to your identity? The identity of pre-literate people is corporate, not private, and the identity of post-literate people like ourselves is moving in the same direction of corporate form. Private identity is phasing out very quickly, and corporate identity, group identity, is coming back very quickly. Now, that this huge revolution by which Western man acquired this amazing transforming power of the alphabet to enable him to take over the control of the physical world in the way he did, in a very devastating way, since he broke it to pieces. The left hemisphere man is a specialist who fragments and breaks everything into bits. He is not a holistic man like the third world right hemisphere man. The third world man, the right hemisphere man, insists upon the holism, the total gestalt, the total situation. He is never a specialist, whereas the left hemisphere man is devoted to specialism. These are themes, incidentally, of Innes's essays and writings, and he deplored, that's why he deplored courses, surely. He considered it a kind of intruding form of specialism which had no place in an academic milieu. But I know that Professor Havelock has a great deal that he can say, I hope he will say, on this subject, and we're also looking forward to his next paper. But please do comment on anything you'd like to say about these hemispheres in their relation to the alphabet.
I know that I'm aware of the book which first put forward this theory of the two hemispheres, but I've only read reviews of it. I've not read it.
No, it's not it's Professor Havelock. It is not a book. This is the work of a group of surgeons over the last few decades.
Yes, but it has been brought out.
Are you thinking of Julian Jaynes?
Read reviews of it. The last one I read was in the New Yorker, actually.
Julian Jaynes, you mean the bicameral mind? That is a bit of science fiction.
Yes, it was. But it was based upon this work.
No, well, not based on, but just alluding to, really.
Yeah. Anyway, I haven't...
All right, guys, that's going to do it. I want to thank you all for being here. We're going to dive into some of these super chats and then log off. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Again, as shout out to some of the peeps. Shout out to David for saying he appreciated the Marshall McLuhan chill stream. That's in fact what it was. It was a chill stream listening to Marshall McLuhan. And for those of you who weren't aware of him and some of his work, well, I hope you're a little bit more familiarized and you at least will know who Marshall McLuhan is now. Now, I personally am a big fan of Marshall McLuhan. I have multiple of his books over there and my PhD research dealing with transhumanism. In fact, I use many of McLuhan's thoughts and theories, whether it be the feminization through technology. Of course, there's a book that I've just came across called Zeros and Ones, written by a feminist woman, or what was her name? Her name was, I'll find it, just Sadie Plant. Sadie Plant wrote a book called Zeros and Ones and talked about how the information age and the movement of technology in the 21st century was going to bolster and support women, and men were going to become displaced and all this different stuff. Well, I think it's true. And in fact, Marshall McLuhan talked about this in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So I hope if you guys are still interested, you can go online and look at tons of his lectures and thoughts. Every time I listen to McLuhan, I find interesting tidbits that I can take away. Every time I read his work, I can find interesting takeaways and things that I can use and apply even to my own research in the 21st century. So please hit that like. I hope that you guys enjoyed this stream. And now I'll dive into some of these super chats. First super chat comes from... Dr. Vagisil throws in $1, and Dr. Vagisil says, how do we counter the inverted social media etiquette, waiting 30 minutes to respond and not seem needy? People forgetting things over 2 years ago, going out and everyone is on their phones, kids not roughhousing outside, sitting inside. Well, as he said, he thinks literacy is a sort of at least a way in which one can hedge against the totalizing effects of the electronic age. I think becoming more and more literate is a huge thing. I think I've noticed in myself that if I use too much social media, it's harder for me to read and write for longer periods of time. And so I actively try to get off my phone and read then for long extended periods of time, just to reorient myself and the dopaminergic systems in my own brain that, I need to get a hit. Whereas if I can sit and read for long periods of time, I feel rewarded. It's like working out. I feel better about myself. I can clearly sit and think a little bit more clearly than I can if I've been on social media posting, responding to people, messages, and stuff like that. So in regards to the media etiquette of waiting 30 minutes to respond and not seem needy, that sounds like that's more about dating, and that can certainly depend on who exactly you're talking to. I know when you first talk to a girl or message back and forth, you want to wait a little bit. But I don't know how much that applies to what McLuhan's talking about in regards to the sensory ratios being affected through the use of technology. But again, I appreciate the support. Dr. Vagisil, he says, how do we encounter the inverted social media etiquette, waiting 30 minutes to respond to not seem needy? Well, I think it depends on who you're talking to. I generally just have a bad problem of responding right away, because I hate when my thought process is affected by immediate messages. So I'm personally somebody who will respond to messages in a block period. So I'll take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I'll respond to texts, messages, inbox, DMs, all that stuff. And then I'll put it away, so then I can go somewhere and then allow my mind to think and reflect and maintain a continuous thread of thought. He also says people forgetting things over 2 years ago, going out and everyone is on their phones. That is true. And that is that is part of the disembodiment, I would say. People who are, again, in society, interacting with people, or again, out and about, and yet their mind, their focus is in the phone, is because they feel more comfortable being disembodied, as he was talking about with the cell phone. And when you talk on the phone, right, you're a disembodied person. You're not the same person when somebody meets you. And we see this, how we interact with people, in live chats, online, with, referring to somebody's handles and stuff. It's very different than when you meet in person. And so I would say, if you're trying to, as you said, deal with the sort of inversion, is becoming a more literate, embodied person, along with, it's not like you can avoid the world that is, the electrified technological world that is, the global village. I think the best you can do at this point is try to be as much left hemisphered as you are right hemisphered. And so I don't think being one over the other is advantageous right now. I think if you're too left hemisphere, now maybe it depends on your personal preference or how you think about this stuff, or if being right hemisphered and being more of the tribal man is a sin or a detriment, well, then maybe you'll want to be more left hemisphere. And my opinion, based on the state that the world, the way that it is, the optimal way to be is try to be as much left hemisphered as you are right hemisphered, or maybe close, but maybe a little bit more left hemisphere. I think the literacy is a huge thing. It allows you to think better. It allows you to have a better vocabulary. It's going to allow you to think more critically and maintain a continuous thread of thought. I think when we're too right hemisphered, we're going to be too intuitive. We're going to be too led by our passions and our temptations. And so just as Christians, I think, again, that's why God gave us scripture. I think that's why God gave us language. I think that's why Christ is the Alpha and the Omega. I think that's why he is the Logos, is that there is something about language and literacy that unifies us with God. And so, again, this is all uncharted territory that we're living in. but becoming conscious of it, at least whether you agree with McLuhan or not, irrelevant, at least hearing his ideas and digesting it and thinking about, well, how would I manage or deal with that, I think is advantageous for all of us. So, you know, it just depends. It just depends on who you are and where you want to go. I think, you know, just trying to becoming more literate, a little bit more linear focused in our minds, a little bit more visually focused. This is one of the problems. You look at the aesthetics of our world. Why are aesthetics falling apart? And it's because people are less visual. Because of the electrified world and the technological global village, people aren't as aesthetic. They're not interested in aesthetics in the same way. And so you see, even I was thinking about with him talking about the electrified man being all and everywhere. Well, some of the ways that we dress is like, you know, the comfortability or you know, the kids wearing sweatpants and oversized clothes and all this different stuff. And the sort of lack of formality is a kind of like all that is. It's like all things together. People will wear a dress jacket with sweatpants and like cross trainers and all this different. It's like, what exactly is this? But wouldn't that totally represent what McLuhan's talking about with the electrified man and the global village of being all together at once? And in a way, that's what we see in people's fashion, the way they dress, where before you have different outfits for different environments and you dress accordingly and people maintain that formality because it gave it a sort of, as Dr. Vach said, a sort of etiquette in that way. But in regard to kids not roughhousing, I tell you one thing, my kids are definitely going to get roughhoused, and I'm going to make sure of it. And so I think not letting them to be, you know, iPad kids and totally on screens all the time, but having to be out in the world, taking them hunting, playing sports, you know, having animals, dogs, walks, nature, all this stuff is essential for, you know, vivifying some of the senses that have been dormant due to the technological age. Next super chat comes from Deanna, and she throws in $1.99. Well, thank you very much, Deanna. Truly appreciate it. God bless you, sister, and hope all is well. Next super chat comes from Jesse Sarasus, and he throws in $10 and says, thanks for your work. Well, Jesse, thank you, brother, for the support. God bless you. Based on your comments, it appeared that you're in north of the border, so God bless you and hope you stay safe. Hope you stay safe. In Canada. I know things are a bit wild. We got multiple brothers and sisters here in Canada. So shout out to Candace, shout out to Thomas, shout out to David, shout out to Jesse. Again, our Canadian brothers and sisters up north. Hope you all are doing well and, you know, staying safe and avoiding aspects of the NWO, if you know what I mean. So thank you so much, Jesse. Truly appreciate the $10 super chat. Thank you for your support, brother. God bless you and stay safe. Next super chat comes from Amptown1. Shout out to Amptown1. It was a pleasure to meet you, sister, today at Liturgy. I hope you come back to St. Mary of Egypt here in our lowly, humble little church there in Greenwood, Indiana. It was a pleasure to be able to sit with you and talk with you, and I know Mark definitely appreciates. Subdeacon Mark really enjoyed chatting with you, and we all hope that you come back. So God bless you, Amptown1. You said you wanted to avoid the first name, so I won't say your first name, but Amptown1, it was a pleasure to meet you, and again, thank you so much for coming to Liturgy. It was great. And then the next super chat comes from our brother and premium COTEL member, Thomas Henderson, throws in $25. Thank you so much, Thomas Henderson, for the $25 super chat. And Thomas says, the future of the future is the present, and that is what they are terrified of. Isn't that the truth? Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. McLuhan was rooted in Christ, the permanent. Why he could see the future so clearly. Thank you, Patrick, for covering him. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, and that's a great point. Again, McLuhan was a devout Christian. Now, whether you want to talk about the papacy or Catholicism, I would say the mid-20th century was a little bit different than the 21st century, where we have access to orthodoxy and aspects of its theology, unique features. It was just a little bit harder to come by in 1938 when he converted to Catholicism. And being a Western man, it makes sense. But I definitely agree with Thomas that McLuhan being rooted in Christ and being a Christian absolutely informed the way he was looking at technology, literacy, language, and the sort of roles that our mediums are affecting us. You know, the ways in which the mediums affect us and change, again, our sensory ratios, how we input information. And I think that it makes sense that if the Edenic fall, Adam and Eve and the state of creation and how bestial it is, you know, God even had to flood it with Noah. If we're moving back in that direction, wouldn't that make sense with our own Christian eschatological timeline, that as we move closer toward the end times, as we move closer towards the Antichrist, in a way, aren't we moving closer and closer to the original fall? And so in a way, history, it's like we fell, we're down here, and then Christ's incarnation, and then in ways, you know, maybe history plateaued for a bit, but certainly it feels like we're then moving back downward. And that would make sense, right? Because the reason why people are going to worship the Antichrist as God is he's going to be sort of completely able to manipulate the environment and the technologies and the information. And so he will appear sort of omnipresent and omnipotent and immortal through the technology, through, again, the extension of the central nervous system that we fallen men have created, not God who created my central nervous system. And so, again, becoming more embodied, becoming more literate as we engage with the world that we cannot avoid, the electronic world we cannot avoid, these black mirrors that we cannot avoid. I think, you know, becoming more bodily, becoming more literate, making sure that we are doing, you know, having a good electronic diet, meaning we take ourselves out of these spaces where we're constantly being inundated with information and social media and electronic stimulation. That to me, that seems like that's the only way forward. So again, Thomas, thank you very much. And that's, again, that's why being rooted in Christ, that's what I try to do. This whole YouTube channel is me uncovering things, not so much that they're my own will. It's just by taking on more and more of the Orthodox phronema and then trying to use those goggles, as was mentioned in the first video, to use those goggles of perspective to look at the world. And I'm just trying to make associations. And you can't help but think McLuhan was doing that in his own way. And so I'm very indebted to his work. I'm very appreciative. Thank you, Thomas. I know that you appreciate Marshall McLuhan and many of his works as well. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you for the friendship. Thank you for being a premium member. Thank you for super chatting. Thank you for being a part of the community. I truly do appreciate it. God bless you and your wife, brother. Thank you so much. Shout out to Thomas Henderson. And then last and final super chat comes from AmpTown1. She throws in $1 and says, do you use a specific strategy to decrease social media and increase reading? I've been trying to, quote, read more, but the generic goal is not working so well. Just curious. Yes. I do have a bit of a strategy. So when I have to read, I try not to engage in a lot of social media that day. I've noticed personally, especially when I have to write, because for me, writing takes a lot more of the maintaining of a continual thread of thought. And I've noticed that if I get too many dopamine hits earlier in the day through social media, that the maintaining of that thread is a little bit harder. Maybe I'll write for 30 minutes or so, and then all of a sudden I got to look at my phone or I hear it vibrating. So for me, I create entire blocks, and if today, let's pretend tomorrow's a reading day, which actually it is, I'll try not to engage too much on the phone at the beginning of the day, and then I'll get into the reading, and after about an hour or 2 hours of reading, you can feel you're in a different place. You're in a more reflective place. You want to sit and think a little bit more. Your mind's a little bit clearer, and then because of the nature of my work, I do have to get on social media. I do need to respond to people. And then I'll do that later in the day. But that's my general strategy is if I have to do long periods of reading, which I love reading, that's another thing that is difficult, that if you don't love reading, reading itself can become very, very boring. So finding things that you want to read is really important, because for me, reading, I love reading because as I read, I feel like I make more and more connections of dots. So for me, reading has replaced the inebriating necessity of drugs. I think that's why I love psychedelics so much, is that I would take LSD or I would smoke weed or I would do certain substances in the evening, and that would then help me connect dots and make associations and see things differently. And so as I've tried to stamp that out of my life, I've noticed reading has become sort of the replacement activity because it stimulates my mind. It allows me to continue to make connections. And it is, I mean, if I didn't read, I'd probably still do drugs. I mean, God willing, I wouldn't. But you get my point that for me, reading is the substitutionary activity that I have. And so I can imagine for somebody who's an adult who isn't a good reader and doesn't like reading, even if you try to put the social media aside and then read for long periods of time, it's going to be difficult. It's something you got to work at. Reading is like riding a bicycle. You can't ride bicycles very well until you practice, and now your reading comprehension, your reading association gets better and better and better. And that is where you get to a point, and this is something you can notice in yourself, and I don't mean to make judgment because we all, read sometimes with our mouths, but if you, when you read silently, have to move your mouth, it means that you haven't sort of developed the mental muscle enough to read. And so just work on it. Just keep reading. Just notice it in yourself, because the more you read, the more you'll notice that you don't have to move your lips or move your mouth when you read a book. And that is sort of that internal monologue, that voice in your mind getting a little bit louder, a little bit stronger, a little bit more forceful. And so the brain is a muscle. Well, Candace says right there, exercise the brain muscles. Exactly it. And the more you read, the more you're going to be able to read. And then it just becomes a habit. For me, I have to grab something and read it. It's the only way that I can occupy my mind long enough to not fall victim to many of the temptations that I still struggle with. So that generally speaking is my strategy, is if I have to do a lot of reading or writing that day, social media has to be put to the side, and I do it from the moment I get up. Because if I just let the first half of my day be too much social media, it takes a long time to quiet the mind down enough to actually do scholastic writing or reading, because I don't want to. I'll get through a few pages and I'm like, oh, I need to do that? Oh, yeah, I need to do that. Oh, yeah. Now stop. So when I read, it's a block period where I'm not doing anything for at least a couple hours but reading. And I love the way I feel after my mind has been quieted and gone through that process for a while, because you can just think a lot more clearly and you feel a little bit more sane. So that's my general take. That's my general strategy. But I'm also addicted to this stuff just as much as anybody else. I use it, the nature of my business, promoting a stream, doing research. I'm always on the screen. And so that's also why I try not to read electronic devices. That's why you'll see my reading list right here. So I got all these books over here that I'm working on, because I personally, this is my own intricacies, is that I like to have a physical book to grab that I can, again, divorce myself from the computer. I don't want to be in front of a computer screen to read. I want to be in my reading chair, maybe with a light on or in the sun, just holding my book, underlining and reading. That's just my personal approach. So anyways, I hope that was useful. Again, thank you, Amptown 1. It was a pleasure to meet you today at Liturgy, and I hope you do come back. Guys, that is going to conclude tonight's stream. I want to thank everybody for being here. I truly do appreciate it. Special shout-outs go to Amptown 1. Special shout-outs to Thomas Henderson. Thank you, brother, for the support, and I do look forward to seeing you this Wednesday. Special shout-out to Jesse Sarasus or Sarasus. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. And then special shout out to Deanna, and of course our always continual supporter and busy man, Dr. Vagisil. So I want to thank all you guys again for supporting the stream and sending in super chats, and I want to thank all you guys for being here and just participating in the live stream, just liking and sharing the stream. Benefits me. That is the support. You don't want to send in a super chat, don't have the money, not in a place, that is fine. It's for people who are, but you can always help me out just by liking the stream and sharing it with friends and family who you think might be interested in these topics. So I will be back Wednesday, because Monday, tomorrow, we have a fitness meeting. Tuesday, I'll be debating Spirit Man over on the Crucible. And then Wednesday, I will be back with another stream. So I will be back Wednesday. I wish you all the best. And as always, until next time, God bless.